How's it going, and welcome to episode 66 of On the Wire, proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter at On the Wire Pod. And if you're listening on a platform that allows ratings and reviews, please take a second to let us know what you think. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. I am once again joined by my co-host Kevin Hasting, who should be followed on the Twitter at Hasting Kevin. And I can't not start with this, Kevin. I know it's on the outline. We're going to mention it. But man, your boy is up. How's it feel? I feel like everybody's up now. Almost everybody up. You got Prado is not up, but Vinnie P, Italian Breakfast is up for your Royals. How's it feel?
Oh, it feels awesome. Felt great when he hit his home run yesterday. 113 miles an hour rope line drive home run. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing more of that. Struggling a little bit out of the gate like we would probably expect. But, yeah, like you said, we'll get into a little more of that later.
Yeah, I just feel like the Royals are it took a while to get Vinnie P up. He had to do a Jordan Alvarez where he just destroyed AAA and finally forced their hand to make room for him. But I think Prado's really the only marquee prospect that they haven't brought up per se yet. And it's nice to see that flow of young talent actually being played. I saw your tweet earlier this week saying this is what needs to happen. It's like these young guys got to get that major league playing time.
And we're going to see some of the veterans be traded off here by the Royals. And it'll be nice when we see Kyle Isbell and Edward Olivares in the lineup at the same time, which we have seen a couple of times recently, but more often, and see what starts to happen.
All right, the Royals report is over. We'll move on now. But luckily, we have a non-Royals fan with us today to break everything down for us. We're extremely lucky to have special guest Chris Deary to help break down our FAAB options we have for this weekend. You may know Chris from the Hey, It's Enrico Palazzo Fantasy Baseball Podcast. And I want to make sure I said the entire title and I didn't just dumb it down just to Palazzo Podcast, which is where you can find it on Twitter, though. So make sure you're looking for that at Palazzo Podcast. I know Chris is one we are all chasing in the Earth Fantasy Baseball League's GLARF chapter as he sits with a fairly comfortable lead at the time of this recording. So make sure you're following Chris on the Twitter at CDeary1999 and check out the Palazzo Podcast at Palazzo Podcast on Twitter itself. Link to both of those can be found in the show's description for today's episode. Chris, man, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me, guys. This is an absolute pleasure. Adam, Kevin. It's amazing that you opened with a little Royals tidbit there and Vinnie P getting his first home run against my hometown Tigers, which it couldn't have gone any differently for the Royals. I wish we could swap teams and I could be a Royals fan. At least they got some great guys coming up with.
Riley Green walked it off today.
I was going to say, that looked pretty good.
He did. It's probably the highlight of the season for us Tigers fans in a otherwise dismal and disappointing season. But congratulations, Kevin. You got some great prospects that are on their way.
Right back at you.
Yeah, things are on the up and up over there. But again, yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I'm really excited.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, Chris. You got torque. Hasn't probably gone as quickly as you would have liked, but Riley Green walked it off. That's nice. Alex Fados looked pretty good until not being on the roster anymore. But yeah, I feel like it's probably been a disappointing year where they feel like the expectations were a lot higher than they currently are at the start of the season.
Yeah, that's Detroit fans. We didn't have any illusions of us winning 90 games, but I felt like we were trending towards being closer to 500, maybe being in the mix the last month. And it's just been awful. The offense has been a disaster. And obviously, Casey Mize goes down. Matt Manning made 2 starts before he went down. So it's been tough. It was good to see Alex Faedo had some successful starts, but now he's been sent down. Offense has been a huge struggle for Detroit. And you mentioned Riley Green. He's been probably the worst rookie, but I think we're just kicking this one down the road, not expecting him to be a superstar right off the bat. So hopefully we can start seeing some encouraging things out of him. But yeah, overall, it's been disappointing for us Tiger fans.
All right. On that positive note, well, let's move into our news and notes. I won't lead it with you, Chris. I'll let you get over all that. And Kevin, we'll start with you. Down in Miami, getting away from the AL and the AL Central, Jorge Soler moves to the IL. What sort of impact does his absence have on either the Miami outfield or just the lineup in general, Kevin?
I think it's more in general because I think it guarantees more playing time for a while longer for everybody that picked up John Birdie. Right? He can play left field. He did that yesterday. Moved Joey Wendle to second base, shuffle guys around, and I think that's what is set in stone with Avizel Garcia, Jesus Sanchez out there. And so we can see him move guys around a little bit, and it just solidifies John Birdie's playing time. I don't have any interest in De La Cruz right now. OPS is barely over 600. But for those that were lucky enough to grab John Birdie when they did and skyrocket up the stolen base category rankings, I think they're safe to continue to do so for a while.
Yeah, even with and we'll get to it in a second, but even with Wendle coming back from the IL himself, Birdie's holding on tight to that leadoff spot as well. Like you mentioned, left field, second base on Friday as well. So it's been a story and a half of what John Birdie's doing. I didn't look at the total, but I think it's 20 stolen bases in the month of June. And so that's
3 already in July.
Yeah, exactly. He is on pace to break that pretty easily. It's what he does. It's just what he does. All right, we'll stay, Chris, in the Miami infield then. Talking about Jazz Chisholm. He was also placed in the IL by the Marlins with right lower back strain. As we alluded to earlier, Joey Wendle did return from his IL stint. He filled in at both second base and shortstop while being plugged right into the 2-hole of the lineup on his return on Friday. In your opinion, does this push Wendle into an everyday playing time right off the bat or in Miami, or do you think the Marlins have a different plan?
No, I think he's the guy there. The key is last night he batted second, which was huge. He did not start today against a right-hander, possibly giving him a little time to come back from his injury. But the possible stolen bases with him is nice. If he can stick at the top of that order, he's a guy who can hit for good average. He's not a swing and miss guy. He's got great batted ball skills. Just looking into his Z contact over there at Fangraphs, 93%. So he hits anything that's in the zone. And Kevin said it perfectly. De La Cruz is not a guy who's going to be getting a ton of runs. So Wendle can play a little bit of the outfield, but you're basically going to see him in on the infield. And I did see they signed Billy Hamilton the other day. Like, this guy is still around. That's really interesting to see. I don't think there's much threat of Billy Hamilton stealing at bats from Joey Wendle. But hey, if Wendle can stick near that top of the lineup, he's a guy who's proven he can hit 300, not a ton of power, but if he's near that top of the lineup, it's a chance for him to have a high average and good amount of runs scored. So he's a guy that they want to keep in the order if they can.
Yeah, Wendle, it's nice that he does have that availability at both shortstop, third base. So, of course, he's got that corner and middle option in the NFBC format. Only 15% rostered across the Earth leagues in the NFBC format as well. So he should be, I think we'll see a lot of bids on him in those leagues. We'll see. I don't know if anybody's has him right now in Glarf or Tarf. You guys have to check those out on your own, but I think we'll see quite a bit of bidding on him based on the roster flexibility that he provides on top of what you're mentioning, like just being in the lineup every day, at least for the next week while Jazz is out. All right, Kevin, we'll go to Cincinnati now. A couple of injuries look like they are coming to an end shortly. Tyler Stephenson, he is set to start his rehab assignment on Monday. And the other Tyler, Naquin, has already started his stint on Thursday. It's expected to last about a week, so he should be back for the weekend next week. Are you grabbing both or either of these Tylers this week in preparation for the return?
Yes, is the short answer. In fact, I put in last week's FAAB article that if you had a spot, it's really hard to carry extra catchers, but it was time to grab Tyler Stephenson while he is nothing. That price will go up a little bit this week, of course, and then next week when we know he's either back with the Major League club or we'll have a date when he will be, then even more expensive. Absolutely. He was a top 5 catcher while he was playing until he went down with the injury. So for sure. And he was available in a lot of places. Like I said, we don't like to carry an extra catcher, whether it's a 2-catcher league or a 1-catcher league, where, by the way, he's a top 10 catcher. So in any format, he is a guy. Tyler Naquin, it depends on my team. We know his story. We know he's really streaky. We know he can help you out in the power department when he goes on one of his streaks. So you are in a bind, and that's what you need at the moment. He's always an option.
Yeah, I saw you putting your money where your mouth was, Kevin. You picked up Stephenson yourself in one of the listener leagues, one of our On the Wire listener leagues, as you side by side drop Salvador Perez. I like how you didn't drop Perez to pick up Stephenson. You picked up a different position to pick up.
I needed a catcher I need to make sure I need a catcher for this past week. Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously you are good to go in that department, and you won't have to hold on to Austin Nola too long if Stephenson comes back, which, you know, it's always nice to say. You don't have to hold on to Austin Nola that too long. All right, we'll move out of Cincinnati, and we will go to your Detroit Tigers, Chris. Some roster moves happening there, as we alluded to. Alex Faedo did move down to AAA, making room for Michael Pineda to return to the rotation from his stint on the IL. Meanwhile, AJ Hinch says that there's pretty much been radio silence from starter Eduardo Rodriguez, who's been dealing with his own personal matter. I mean, he's giving him his space to do, but really have no idea when or if he'll even be back with the team this season. Rodriguez is still rostered in 81% of main event leagues. It's 15 teamers on the NFBC. 46% of online championships, those are 12 teamers, are still rostering him. So what camp would or do you fall into with Eduardo? Are you stashing him still, or are you passing him along with no end in sight of his absence?
I think it's just difficult when Hinch comes out and says, really, it's just been radio silence and that they haven't really talked to him. So it makes me wonder, has he been working out? He been throwing on the side? When there's no timetable for a guy, whether it's injury or coming back from any personal issues or anything like that, it definitely brings up caution for myself. So I think Erod right now is probably a pass for me. You think of the mental aspect of when you are not in the game and then you have to try to come back and you have distractions that are going on, and everyone's not 100% sure what he's been going through. So I'm not sure we will see him for quite some time, if we even see him at all. Like I said, is he working out? Is he throwing? I doubt it at this point. He had a slow start. He had a couple back-to-back solid outings before he did go away. And the Tigers do really need him desperately. They're struggling to find any type of pitching. I mentioned before Manning and Meyers have been down. We're going to talk about Michael Pineda, who's now coming back here. But it's difficult for me to invest something in Erod without seeing him coming back and seeing what he can prove. Now, if we find out in a couple of weeks that he's been throwing on the side, that maybe he's going to get a little minor league stint and warming back up as we get closer towards August, I could be excited about that. But at this point, he's probably just holding the roster spot for you. I don't think you're necessarily dropping him in many leagues, but he's certainly a pass for me. When you talk about Michael Pineda is going to be coming back. I don't hate Pineda, but what I dislike about Pineda is he just doesn't get those swings and misses that I'd like to see. He's really just flirting with disaster. He's got an 8.5% swinging strike before he hit the IL. And the ERA looks 2 runs better than what his FIP and XFIP looks like. So Pineda's not going to be a guy who's going to be able to give you a ton of wins, one, because he plays on the Tigers, and he's not going to strike out a lot of guys. And that really makes me caution thinking about Pineda being a successful starter for my squad. So I'm probably looking other places with both those guys.
Yeah, Michael Pineda obviously dropped quite a bit when he did hit the IL, even in 15 teamers, 40% rostered across main event leagues. So readily available in most formats. So if you do want to take that chance, if you are desperate in that realm, he is probably on the wire. So take a look for that, especially even in a streaming matchup. He might be a little bit more pleasant of an option for you to consider. All right, Kevin, since I gave Chris some Detroit talk, I'll give you more Royals talk. And like I said at the top of the show, they finally did it. They traded Carlos Santana to the Seattle Mariners, making room for the Italian breakfast, Vinnie Pasquianto. Another power hitting call-up, though, came in Philadelphia, where the Phillies called up designated hitter Darik Hall. So, of course, 2 very important questions for you. I'm going to lead you with the most important one. Will the nickname Italian breakfast stick long-term? And should it? And then just answer that question first, and we'll get to the actual fantasy relevant question.
I think, unfortunately, it's probably going to stick around longer than I and some others would like. Yeah, it's an obvious takeoff on Billy Butler, country breakfast. But country breakfast is a big, full breakfast, and Billy Butler was a big guy. Italian breakfast is a cappuccino and a biscuit with some jam.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't. I kind of like Bomb Father, or as Rob,
that's a good
the intro,
like
the Dong Father. I kind of either one of those much better if he adds some more home runs. But unfortunately, I think it does probably stick around a little longer than we would like.
All right, that's fine. Between Vinnie P and Darik Hall, which one of these two power bats do you have producing better rest of the season for their major league team, as they're both going to be eligible for FAAB this weekend?
It's really interesting. So Bryce Harper out 6 to 8 weeks. He's the designated hitter when he comes back, as long as Philadelphia still has something to play for. Otherwise, then maybe they decide that it's time for him to go take care of the UCL issue a little early to get a head start on being ready for next season. But the successful surgery, that was already 3 or 4 days ago in a 6 to 8 week timeline. I know they're saying mid-August. That kind of, if he's on the short side of that timeline, maybe early August, that's all going to depend on how the Phillies are performing as a team. And that can have a lot to do with what's going on with Darik Hall and his continued playing time, if we're talking full rest of season. Also, Verlaine in there will probably still get some designated hitter opportunities. I think Vinnie Pasquianto, unless he completely busts, probably gets more at-bats in the short term and has a longer leash in the long term. Also, with all three of hits that Darik Hall has this week being home runs, we automatically thought early in the week that, maybe this is a cheaper Vinnie P. Maybe not so, no. Right? After 3 home runs in his first 3 hits. It's going to be interesting, I think. But like I said, I think Pasquianto probably has longer leash and more at-bats on a per week basis to start out. But yeah, Hall, it's hard to argue with 3 for 3 home runs per hit, right?
Yeah, no, you can't really. And you're very short sample size, but the 231 average is right around league average anyway. That's not hurting you per se. We'll see if that holds up long term. It is nice to see that Hall did get first base eligibility from the get-go, and he didn't have to earn it, because it doesn't look like he would be earning it in Philadelphia, as he's been designated hitter for all of his starts thus far since getting the call up.
Yeah, and what's interesting, Adam and Kevin, is both these guys have been batting cleanup the last few days for these teams. So these are 2 rookies that have been in the league a week, and managers already trust them to bat cleanup, which is a huge boost. I'm really interested to see the FAAB bids, specifically on Hall, coming up this Sunday.
Yeah, first base hasn't been as lucrative or as deep as one might think from a historical viewpoint as well. So it's nice to see that these guys coming in that corner infield spot can produce right away, especially, as you said, Chris, in that cleanup spot in their team's respective lineups. All right, we'll go to somebody who probably won't be cleaning up in their new lineup, and that's Jonathan Villar, who signed with the Angels after being DFA'd by the Cubs. I did not think that we would go 3 straight weeks talking about Jonathan Villar, Kevin, but here we are. But Chris, do you think he gets utilized any differently in LA than he did in Chicago?
Yeah, this one's a tough one for me. I'm not a massive Jonathan Villar fan. He had 6 stolen bases with the Cubs before he got DFA'd and moved over here to the Angels. Villar has an awful OBP. He's not a guy who's going to steal 40 bases like he did several years ago. The issue is, in terms of him possibly being a good ad here and getting some run here within the infield, is look at what the Angels are strutting out there right now. Rengifo and Velasquez have not really lived up to anything this year. Velasquez batting 170 with 10 stolen bases. Rengifo just 240 with 1 home run and a stolen base. It's been a mess there on the infield for the Angels. And you do have to remember that Villar does have a little bit of pop. He had 18 home runs last year, and he's been able to have a little bit of pop and some of those stolen base opportunities. Like I said, he had 6 with the Cubs. I just don't think he's going to be a guy who's going to be a full-time guy who's going to get an opportunity there in the infield. But I just also don't know where else they're going. He's probably not a guy that I'm looking to grab. Sure, the possibility of stolen bases with a little bit of pop is good, but he's really not going to give you much else. He's going to bat near the bottom of the order. I don't think he's going to get everyday playing time with the Angels. So keep an eye on it moving forward. I think maybe there's some more moves coming here for the Angels if they need to stiffen up their infield a little bit. But the issue is they just haven't been very good this year. Obviously, Madden was fired and the team fell apart a little bit. So Angels got to think about what they're going to do on the future in this infield. And I don't think Jonathan Villar is quite a part of their future.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I'll be curious to see how he gets used. It is nice to have the flexibility, of course, but if you're not playing on a regular basis, that only takes you so far. Kevin, in St. Louis, Jordan Hicks returned from the IL to the Cardinals bullpen. Do you think he gets into the save mix for St. Louis before the All-Star break?
That depends on what you mean by into the save mix. I could see him getting an opportunity or two shuffling things around, but in spite of the couple runs he gave up the other night, Ryan Helsley has performed well. Giovanni Gallego's still there. I don't think this is a move they will make out unless something happens injury-wise for the next couple of weeks. I think they'll stick with what they have been doing and get him back into the flow of things at the major league level. But it's possible. But I don't think it's in the plans that they want him back in a ninth inning role per se. But he would be in the mix if a situation arises where other guys were used earlier in the game or if we see an injury. That's not something I would count on.
It's just the way that they've been mixing and matching and pulling on the heartstrings of all of those who drafted Gallegos throughout the draft season makes me think, yeah, he might get a save opportunity before the All-Star break. I'm in your same camp, whether or not he's not going to lead the team in saves by the end of the year or any stretch of the imagination, but any chance that he actually gets stretched out again or to be in the rotation, do you think, or for long term, or do you think he's pretty much stuck in that bullpen role based on injury concerns that we've seen?
The injuries have to be concerning. I think they would ideally, that's what they would hope would be possible. I don't know if they think it is any longer. I think that's probably what he wants. But the injuries are concerned. It's one of those things that I'll be interested to see if he starts getting more interested in, does he start going multi-innings in relief than if he's getting in the ninth inning is more what I'm going to be keeping my eye on. See if it looks like they are willing to allow him to build up again.
All right, we will stay in St. Louis, Chris, and talk about their actual rotation piece as they brought back Matthew Liberatore to start today as we're recording this on Saturday. Assuming he doesn't go straight back down to AAA as he did the last time they called him up for a start, how interested would you be especially with the starting pitching market being so limited on the wire on any given week?
Yeah, Matthew Liberatore had a start today, and he didn't look good. He gave up 5 earned runs in 2 2/3. Before the injury, he had 18 innings. The issue was he was getting hit hard in those outings before he had that IL stint. And the thing that's concerning with me with Liberatore is he is a nice prospect. I got him in the trade over here in the offseason. The issue is he doesn't have an overpowering fastball, and he hasn't gotten the swings and misses that you'd like to see from a top end of the line starter. It's got a nice curveball and a changeup that he's going to rely on a lot as some of that off-speed stuff. The Cardinals right now need him. Flaherty's back down again. Steven Matz has been on the IL as well. So I think we're probably going to ride out Liberatore for the next couple of weeks. Looking at some of his schedule coming up, I don't like the schedule coming up. He's got Atlanta coming up next after this. So this could be one of these things where he's going to have to struggle in the show for the next couple of weeks. Or do they allow him to get right in the minors first? I think the smart play would have him be down in the minors and have him get right. But the Cardinals do need him. It's a long season, of course, but they're chasing the Brewers right now. That's going to be a fight all the way to the end. I probably don't have a ton of interest in Liberatore, at least moving forward over these next couple of weeks, but it's something to keep an eye on because he does have some good stuff. It's just I'd like to see more out of that fastball.
Shocker. Rays trade away top prospect starting pitcher, and he does not do well out of the gate with his new team. I am just shocked. It's never happened before. Yeah.
Yeah, we're kicking ourselves in Detroit here because we gave up Isaac Paredes for Austin Meadows, and Austin Meadows has 0 home runs and had a stint of vertigo and is now on the IL. The interesting part is the Tigers would have never made that trade if Riley Green did not get injured in spring training. If Riley Green does not get injured in spring training, Riley Green is up with the team, and the Tigers aren't making that trade and giving up Paredes. So it seems like the Rays seem to fleece a lot of us.
I haven't looked at any box scores since we started recording, but I'm just going to go ahead and assume that Isaac Paredes has hit 4 home runs today because that just seems to be what he does.
He had at least one.
Yeah. That was pretty close then. All right, Kevin, let's finish this off here in Boston. I say here in Boston like I'm in Boston right now, but the Red Sox placed Rich Hill on the IL with a knee sprain. And Alex Cora mentioned that he expected to see Garrett Whitlock rejoin the Boston bullpen and stay in that role for the remainder of the year. So not an option to fill the shoes of Hill in the rotation. So what should we be looking for out of the Red Sox rotation while Hill remains out?
I believe Connor Siebold's going again on Sunday. That gives them 4 starters, healthy starters at the moment.
Did you use it with quotes? Are you using the word starter with quotes with Siebold?
Hard quotes.
Just want to make sure.
Some 4 listed starters. And we're expecting Chris Sale to go 5 innings in his next rehab start and then start for the Red Sox a week from Monday. So we need to fill in a day, maybe 2 here this week. And then Nathan Eovaldi through his second bullpen session in 4 days, 35 pitch-ins. There's some question he may not even need a rehab start. It's only been 3 weeks since he went on the IL. So ideally, if I'm in your shoes, Adam, as a Red Sox fan, it's all right, Chris Sale, Nathan Eovaldi, here we go. We're set. At least we're moving those hard quotes you talked about to the back of the rotation, right? And then we got something to work with. But I'm really wondering if Brayan Bello is going to get a shot here.
He
is on the 40-man roster.
Yeah.
He is on the 40-man roster. The concern is I don't know how much more they're going to let him pitch this season. He's already at 85 innings, and he only went 95 last season. So I would guess maybe he's got 30, 40 innings in him the rest of the season. But why not give him 12, hopefully 10 to 12 of those right now in a couple of starts with the major league level and see what he can do. He's what he's done for the past 3 seasons in the minor leagues. He just kept on, he's keeping it up. That strikeout rate near 35% is amazing. Even with the 10% walk rate at the AAA level, you're still talking 25% K- walk rate. Let's get Bello up here and see what he can do.
Yeah, that would be nice. Of course, everybody's instinct goes, well, if you're not going to pitch him for the remainder of the year or whatnot, like, why would you call him up? Why would you start his clock? But there's going to be plenty.
Nothing on your clock, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can easily manipulate that next year. And there are going to be rotation spots open up at the start of 2023 for the Red Sox. So why not treat this like his cup of coffee, like his September call up, which he may not be, like you alluded to, he might not be pitching in September. So that might not be an option for him. So I'm on board with the Bello train there in July. Call it Christmas in July, call it whatever you want, but it'd be nice to see him in there right before the All-Star break. Give everybody give the rotation a little bit of a break, kind of bridge the gap between Sale coming back, Eovaldi coming back, give him a little extra time if he needs it. So I'm on board with that. So yeah, somebody to keep an eye out.
Let me flip this back to you, Adam. In non-NFBC formats, do you grab him this weekend if you have a spot, hoping this is what happens?
Yeah, if I have that ability, if I have that roster flexibility, especially in a non-NFBC. No, I have no interest in him right now in an NFBC format. One, he's not available because he hasn't made his debut yet, but he's probably also not going to provide enough value in that format. But like my home dynasty league, we have very strict rules. It's very similar to NFBC, where you can't pick up a minor leaguer if they haven't made their debut yet and they go on waivers. Otherwise, it's fastest finger. And so when he does make that, he makes that debut in that league, especially with 99% of the league being based in or around Boston, he will be a very high waiver priority will be used on him. Yes. And if you have the ability to stash him right now, there's no reason not to, even just for the 1 or 2 starts that he might make. And if he doesn't make it and they shut him down or what have you, fine. If it's not a dynasty league, it's not a keeper league, just drop him. It's not a big deal. It's nothing more than a streamer. So might as well grab him now, hoping he get those extra strikeouts by the time he does make his debut.
Adam, has Boston talked about what they have on terms of an innings limit for him or a cap? I think you said he was at almost 40 already.
Oh, he's at 85.
That's right. He started in AA. That's right. I haven't
seen any official notice of what his limits are. I think maybe what Kevin's alluding to is just natural progression, as I'm looking this up now. He threw just under 100 innings in 2021. So I can imagine that they'll want to push him a little past that, probably closer to 120, 125, until we don't want his arm to fall off, because he's obviously a piece of the future. And so I don't see him going much further than that. Desperate times do call for desperate measures sometimes, so we'll see how they treat him. All right, that's going to wrap it up for our news and notes section of this episode. As always, I'm sure we missed a few things worth noting. To keep up with all the news of the day, make sure you're listening to the First Pitch podcast with Chad Young, Scott Chu, Daniel Port, and Kevin Hasting. We break down all the news, highlights, and observations from every day's worth of games, as well as looking ahead at each slate to keep you up to date with everything you need to know to win your fantasy league. In just a moment, we're going to talk to Chris Deary about how he's found so much success in the Earth League in his first year in Glarf. Before we do that, we're going to take a quick break.
Hey, Alex Fast here, and thanks for listening to this podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. If you're a fan, consider supporting all of us by getting a PL Plus subscription, where you're going to get an ad-free website and get access to our Discord, where you can talk to all of our podcast hosts and staff. Plus, you can hang out with our incredible Pitcher List community. It's basically a baseball sanctuary year-round for as low as $8 a month. You can sign up at pitcherlist.com/plus, and you're going to get your first month free with promo code podcast. Also, don't forget to check out everything else we do as well, from YouTube videos, live streams, newsletters, off-season articles, TikToks, breakdowns, over 15 baseball podcasts on our network. We can't stop talking about baseball even during the off-season. So sign up for PL Plus today at pitcherlist.com/plus and use promo code podcast to get your first month free. All right. Thanks for listening. Let's get back to the show.
All right, we are back. You're listening to On the Wire, part of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. I am Adam Howe, of course, joined by co-host Kevin Hasting and this week's special guest, Chris Deary of the Palazzo Podcast. Chris, our focus topic today is all about you, man. It's just all about your success, as we talked about before we're recording. We don't always get to talk about all of our teams that are successful, but you have one very successful team as of right now. Granted, we haven't even hit the halfway mark, but we're going to go ahead and toot your horn a little bit anyway. You are handedly leading the Glarf League by, I think, like over 10 points right now at the top of the standings. Glarf being part of the Earth Fantasy Baseball League, which Kevin has joined as well in the TARF League, the Texas Area Roto Fantasy League. And there, I forgot how many. And David McDonald's going to be upset at me for not knowing the number off the top of my head. I think there are nine leagues in the league.
I believe there's 10.
Yep.
10. All right. It's good that there's an even number.
Yeah.
So, man, I'm just talking about, man, what's gone right, what's gone wrong, which is minimal. You're 17th overall, I think, in Earth, even though you're in the top of the top league. So Glarf, for those who aren't aware, the way Earth works is that of the 10 leagues, we not only is there an overall individual winner, and not only can you win your league, but the leagues are all competing against each other as well. So Glarf is currently in the lead for league champion, and the winning league gets their choice of charity donated to. I worded that terribly, but you get the gist of it. Like, every league picked a charity to make a donation toward, and the winning league charity gets all the money, which is nice for us as we stand at the top of the leaders right now in Glarf. But you're 17th overall, even though you're top of the top league, which is always fun to see how the overall rankings work out. But talk to us about what's your secret, that a great question everybody loves to hear. What's going on? What's going right? And tell us a little bit about some of the success stories of the first half for this team.
I don't know if there's too many secrets. I've stayed away from some of the bad luck that can hurt you in a lot of roto leagues, 15-team roto leagues. My team has been healthy most of the year, which has been really huge for myself. I am not a roto player. I generally play head-to-head. I play dynasties. I play a lot of keeper leagues. I just started getting into roto leagues the last few years, and it's taken a while to get used to the strategy, especially FAAB on Sundays, and really trying to accumulate the right stats in the right categories as well. So some of the things that have gone, I ended up with the 15th spot in terms of draft, which is actually my preferred spot. If I wasn't going to get one of the top 3 or 4 picks, I want to be near the back end of a draft. It helps me strategize when I'm looking at a handful of players that I'm grouping together when I'm picking. Now, the good news is most of these draft rooms are anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. Some of them go even longer than that. So it gives me some time to continue to research through it. What's also good is Glarf was one of my last drafts in terms of any NFBC leagues, which was good. So I was able to do 5 or 6 other roto drafts before then. But just looking at my first few picks, my strategy really was, so I went Devers with my first pick at 15. There's a lot of talk about third base scarcity. I had not gotten a share of Devers. He's a guy who's going to give you great average with a little bit of power, which has been fantastic. And he's had a great year. But really, my next 3 picks was the triumvirate of myself having such a really good year. I'm number 1 in Glarf in power in terms of RBIs, runs, home runs. Number 2 in RBIs. I'm number 2 in average. And I ended up getting Trout, Olsen, and Judge. And we all know what Aaron Judge is doing this year. He's on pace for 60 home runs. Mike Trout has been healthy enough to be solid. I had Trout as a guy who was a top 7 pick for me this year. So when I had him at 16, I was ecstatic. Matt Olson has had some struggles at the plate. He's not really hitting for as much power as you'd like to see, and the average is a little down, but he also leads the league in doubles, and he's really starting to come around here in the last few weeks. So my offense has really carried me most of the season here. I look at my pitching, and the pitching is interesting because if you look at my first few picks when it came to pitching, Jose Barrios was my first pitcher off the board, and he's been absolutely atrocious this year. He's had maybe 2 or 3 solid games, but he's been bad, and he's someone that I drafted in a lot of leagues. I was high on. I saw him as a decent late SP1 type guy, and he just hasn't been able to do it. But really where I hit my bread and butter is in the 8th round, I was able to draft Justin Verlander. I had Justin Verlander as a top 10 starting pitcher this year. A lot of people didn't think he'd be able to come back, being out a year and a half there with Tommy John. I saw Verlander for 13 years in Detroit. This guy's an absolute workhorse, and he's been fantastic this year. He was the 29th pitcher off the board in Glarf, and I had him as a top 10 pitcher. So getting him in the 8th was really huge for me. And then Patrick Sandoval, I targeted everywhere. He had a nice game today with a lot of strikeouts, did get the loss. His ERA has been able to sit a little under 3 this year, so he's been okay. Tony Gonsolin in the 21st round. This guy is absolutely unbelievable this year. So to scoop him up late, it's been good. But what I talked about is I stayed away from injuries, and I've been able to make a few moves in FAAB to help the team out. But I'm really pleased with how it's been going so far. I could probably be higher up in the overall Earth standings if I focused a little bit more on helping myself with saves and speed. I was hoping I would possibly get double-digit steals from guys like Aaron Judge or Liberatore, Jorge Polanco. That's just not going to happen this year. So I'm bottom of the league in stolen bases. Saves, it's only been 2 guys that I've been able to get any type of saves with, and that's Barlow and Duvall. I was actually looking at the team that I had drafted, and I actually had Clay Holmes at one point, and then I dropped him on May 8th for Rafael Montero, who actually scooped up 3 saves in 8 days, but I wish I had Clay Holmes. The guy's got 13 saves, and it looks like he may have that role even with Chapman coming back. So it's been a great time so far, and I've been having a really good time playing Glarf, and being successful makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, it sounds like you've pretty much answered the question already, but I'll force the issue. Do you think you did more in your draft, or do you think that your FAAB work in the first 10 or so weeks of FAAB has impacted where you are in the standings more so?
It was clearly the draft for me. Really, the biggest scoop up I did end up getting was Jock Peterson. I was able to get Jock Peterson super late, which has really helped. And it hasn't been FAAB. I've lost out on several guys within FAAB every Sunday, whether it's only a couple bucks or not. And then it's the classic, you'll spend like $35 on a guy and someone else will scoop them up or have a bid for $2 or $3. You're like, oh man, I overbid on that one. I still got half my money left, which is encouraging. I've made some real wacky plays in FAAB the last few weeks, trying to get guys to hopefully just get some playing time and get steals. I rostered Victor Robles for a little bit, and it's been piecing some things together in pitching as well, because I'd like to get some more strikeouts. And it's probably been about 4 or 5 weeks here that I've been at the top, but it's a tough league, Adam. There's some real superstars, managers in this league, and it's going to be tough to hold them off.
It's also one of the most active, regardless. Of course, we all want our league to win. So even if you're at the bottom of the standings, like I am right now, I'm not the very bottom, but I'm in the bottom half, you still want to do right by your league and you want to continue to compete, which is really nice in knowing that everybody's there to always compete each and every week. What's not nice is that the competition for FAAB every week is insane. Like the list of FAAB bids that are being made is easily the league that I have the most FAAB winning bids of any league. It doesn't hurt or help that the FAAB deadline here, even though it's on the NFBC format, it's at midnight Eastern time instead of 10 p.m. Eastern time. And so you get to see all those winning bids across the main event through a TGFBI, all the other 15 teamers that you might have access to. And all of those winning bids are viewable. They're all public. Anybody can look those up on NFBC, whether you're in a league or not. So if you want to do that extra effort and you want to go the extra mile, you get that extra insight about, all right, well, this guy went for X amount of dollars. Do I need to up my bid in Glarf? Because everybody's seen that already if I really want them. I think something interesting you mentioned, there's been times where you'll bid $35 on a guy and your backup bid will be $2 or $3. And you're like, oh, did I overspend? I think it's really important to, for people to realize that's not an overspend if it's right for your roster, in my opinion. Like if you need to fill a spot, $30, $35, whatever it is, even though your backup bid or not the runner-up bid might only be $2 or $3, if you didn't win that player, your roster might be screwed. And so I think it's important to know that your bid is the right bid based on your roster, not so much based on only what you think everybody else is going to bid. It's always nice to win your bid by $1 or even win the tiebreaker. Don't get me wrong. That's a great feeling. Just know that a winning bid is a winning bid. That's what really matters.
Yeah, you got to get your guys. And if it seems like you're overspending, maybe you're the only one in that league out of maybe 3 or 4 teams that are looking for that type of position or that type of category that you're looking for. And it's helpful, sure, if you spend $35, $40 on a guy and there's not that big runner-up bid there. If you end up rostering this guy for the rest of the season, that seems like a success to me. You see it all the time of guys early on in the season, a guy like a Stephen Kwan, who actually has picked it up lately. He was a huge bid those first couple Sundays there, and then he just fell apart for a little bit. He's starting to come back around, but there's always guys each year that there's that hype. A prospect coming up. That's why I talked about Darik Hall coming up this Sunday. I'm really interested to see what type of bids come out for him, because there could be bids at upwards to $150, $175. And it's going to be useful if you have that guy the rest of the season. You're producing him, you're putting him in your lineup. But it can also be really discouraging when you spend that much money and then 2 weeks later that guy gets sent down.
Yeah. And
have either of you guys taken advantage of the time difference in FAAB? Because the one time I tried to, it was the guys I was after had went for a lot less in all of the 10 p.m. NFBC leagues. I dropped all my bids, didn't get any of them, and my original bids would have got the players. So I haven't even looked at it since. Once I set them, they're set. I haven't went back to that. One time sample size was enough for me. I'm done with it. But have you guys tried to take advantage of that?
Yeah, I look at it every week, Kevin, with the other leagues that are going on. And it can be useful just to get a ballpark of what's going on. But really, for me, it gives me that extra 2 hours to put in a little bit more work to see what happened for the rest of that week in terms of the Sunday night game being over. And it gives me a chance to dig a little deeper in as I have 2 hours left on that Sunday. I got to ask Dave, what's the intentionality behind it being a midnight, which I absolutely love. I know we do have some guys that are in the central time zone as well. And I know it can be a struggle for many managers that have upwards of 25, 30 teams, and your FAAB bids are 10 o'clock every day, and guys are spending all of Sunday trying to get that done. I couldn't do it. I try to stick it below 10 teams each year. It gives me a chance to really focus on each team, but it can be a struggle. But Kevin, I completely get it. Like, you're looking at, these guys went for much less. Let me drop my bid down. And it's tough. You got to get to know your managers in your league and really get to know the other rosters. I know when it's not a head-to-head league, sometimes you can push aside what other teams are doing and what other teams might be needing. But I think that's important to make notes on as you're going into the bids on the weekend. looking to see how much money a certain manager has left in their FAAB bids. What categories could they be going for? Are they going to be targeting some of the guys you're targeting as well? It's a lot of work, but it can pay off in the end.
No, I hate it. I hate the midnight time. I thought I was going to love it, but being East Coast, I just want, having 2 kids, I just want to go to bed. And so I have not touched any of my bids. I place all my bids at the same time across all my FAAB leagues, including that one. And I'm up long enough to see what the FAAB results are for the 10 o'clock run. And I'll look at them. Oh, I got this guy for this much in this other league. You might in like TGFBI or whatever. TGFBI is a whole different can of worms, but we'll leave that for a different show. But I might think in the back of my head, I know I have this bid in for him in Glarf. That's fine. Let's just see how it works out. I made my bid based on my roster, based on what I needed. I've got all my conditional bids. I feel good about whatever ends up happening. And I skipped a couple FAAB runs in Glarf just because there was nothing that I really needed at the time. Obviously, you would think differently based on where I am in the standings. I probably needed something in every week. I felt at the time I was in a good spot. But moving away from this FAAB, Kevin, you are in TARF, the newly formed Texas area Roto Fantasy League. And you have the luxury of living in Hawaii. So you get that extra 2 hours of FAAB means nothing to you. You're going to be up no matter what, probably. But TARF, second, right behind Glarf, kind of jumping a little bit closer, a little bit farther away in the standings, nipping at our heels. How's that league been treating you, and how are you doing it in that league yourself?
Well, it's really interesting because like you brought up with the overall component as a league, I've been in the bottom third of this league the entire season. But like you said, everybody is doing in Glarf, same as TARF. I'm fabbing every week. I'm setting my lineups twice a week. I'm clawing doing everything I can because those of us in the bottom third of the league are performing in the overall has just as much of an effect on that overall as the guys in the top third. So I love that aspect of it.
Yeah, me too. We have, I think all but 2 or 3 of the players are in the top 100. So that's what's obviously leaving in the overall. And that's what's putting Glarf at the top. I assume, I don't have it in front of me, but TARF would be somewhat similar since you're so close to the top of the standings in general as well.
Actually, no, that there's 3 of us that have been 130 or lower out of 150 for quite some time in the overall, which is surprising to me because it doesn't feel like my team is that bad. It's one of those teams that isn't really performing, but I go and I'm looking at my lineup and I'm like, this team isn't that bad. Why am I not moving up? Because everybody else is doing the same thing, which is the intent and which is what makes it so great.
I was reminded of this story. An old chef of mine worked in restaurants for 20 years, and an old chef of mine would tell me the story about how she would sit down and do reviews of her cooks, and one day she was just had enough and she couldn't talk. She just wasn't feeling well, and this person who she thought was like her sous chef, it was supposed to be really good, and she had nothing else to say to him except, why aren't you better? And that's exactly what I just heard out of you. It's like, this team, you should be good. Why aren't you better? Why are you making things difficult for me right now?
Yeah, I made mistakes in the draft, but I thought I'd taken care of them, and it's not panning out that way so far.
Still lots of season to go, as one would say. And like we've all talked about, especially in these Earth leagues, everybody's going to be active till the end of the night. So we're going to see, I think we're still going to see lots of opportunity for people to move around in the standings. And we'll see if other leagues can get it together and compete for the top end of the Earth standings as well. So more to look for that. I'm sure we'll have more members of Earth on the show to recap some of the updates as the season moves on as well. All right, Chris, good luck with you the rest of the way. Not too much luck, but just enough to hold Glarf at the top. And we'll see where it ends up.
Adam, just like you said, there's plenty of time. You can still catch me. We're just getting to June, and we all know how things can flip. And that's why I do love fantasy, because it's a long season. I've seen it before where, You can be down in double digits, 10th, 12th, 13th. And I've seen teams make climbs, and maybe you not climb all the way back to win Glarf, but hey, if you could make a run at me and maybe bump me down and maybe get ahead of you, that would be great. But what I would love to see is if Glarf can take the overall, which would be fantastic.
For the second year in a row, that would be good. 2 years in a row. Glarf did win last year, even though Chris and I were not in the league last year. We're doing our best to repeat the league.
There's a lot of pressure on us then.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. One of us is living up to that pressure. All right, so let's move into our actual FAAB recommendations for this coming Sunday. As we tend to do, we do go category by category or groupings of like-minded categories. And we will start with our power categories, home runs, RBIs. Kevin, I'll start with you here. Who might hit a couple of bombs for us? Who might go Paredes on us this week as we are looking for some power?
Obviously, we're all going to have our bids on Pasquianto, Darik Hall, depending on which we prefer. We'll have it ordered in that way, depending on how much we want to spend of our FAAB this week. But we're going to need, if you aren't just using these guys as upgrades, if we're in need of power or in need of a position, he hasn't performed well lately. So this is a go-to for me in deeper leagues. Brad Miller in Texas only has one of his 7 home runs over the past 7 weeks, but he's a streaky guy. We know that. And he's playing versus right-handed hitters, or right-handed pitching, even sometimes versus lefties. He's going to get his at-bats. Texas is set to face all right-handers for the first half of the week, and I believe 2 out of 3 for the weekend. And he's one of my go-to guys when I'm in a situation like this, when I need what he can produce, although he hasn't recently, but we know he has those skills. He's going to have playing time, and the position flexibility that he has, I can get him in my lineup. He will be my stipulation, my reserve bids on some of these guys that I'm more hoping that I am able to roster this week. But Brad Miller's a guy he's one of those guys that he's one of the first guys I go look for when I'm in need of someone at a position he's eligible at. And it's 3 of those positions now for him. He's someone I'm looking at this week. We've talked about quite a few players over the past few weeks and try not to double up too much. And he's the type of guy that can be available. He's 60% rostered in 15-team main event leagues, but only 3% in online championship. So there's that big drop off in 12-team leagues and lower if you're in need. That also means maybe there's somebody that you'd rather have available in those leagues, but he seems to always be there when you need him.
Yeah, I think this is a really good example of knowing that, especially this time of year, as your FAAB budgets are really cutting down, to have as many of those conditional bids that you feel comfortable with filling that roster spot that you're looking to fill with the Darik Halls or the Vinnie P's of the world, and that you'd be okay with your Brad Millers or your Pavin Smiths or somebody else available at the first base position or corner position that you need to fill. Make sure you have those. It can help you soften the blow when you don't get the top guy, or at least keep your bids down lower than they probably need to be, or they need to be if you only have 1 or 2 guys that you're bidding on. And who knows, you might still get lucky and get the Darik Halls of the world that you really want at that lower bid, but still feel comfortable that you're filling that roster spot with the Brad Miller or whoever. So I think that's a good call out there for that reason. Exactly. Chris, who might add some pop to your lineups if you win the bids this week?
You know, it's interesting, and Kevin brings up Brad Miller. It's a guy who's been in the league a long time. He's a guy that I look for as well. He's a guy who's streaky. I'm going to go with another guy who we've seen in the league many times. He's put up 30 home runs in the past. I'm going to go with Dan Vogelbach out there in Pittsburgh. Vogelbach's got 2 home runs in his last week. He's got 10 on the season. He's 60% owned right now. What I love about Vogelbach is even though he's just left-handed, he's been starting against left-handers as well. He started against a left-hander today and batted 6th, which was really important. He's a guy who can crush fastballs, which is fantastic. 24% K rate, but he's also going to get on base. He 13% walk percentage, so he has the patience at the plate. He also has the highest launch angle over his career, and this is a guy who can be streaky. He hasn't gotten a ton of run the last couple of years here in Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, but if you go back to where he was in Seattle, when he hit 30 home runs in 2019, the power is still there. Like I talked about, he crushes the ball. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes over these next couple of weeks. He's not going to give you batting average. The guy's a 211 career hitter, but if he can give you those power numbers, he's going to bat anywhere from 4th to 6th in the Pirates lineup. Like I said, he'll bat 6th more often than not when it's a lefty on the mound. But we've seen Dan Vogelbach do this in the past, and it's these names like a Vogelbach and a Brad Miller or like a McHugh Franco, guys that not everybody is going to be chasing on the waiver wire and in the FAAB bids every Sunday, because you guys both brought up a great point. When you have a guy like Vinnie P and Darik Hall that are going to be big bids this Sunday, a lot of people are going to be going after those, but you can really make your bread and butter on scooping up guys for single digits to maybe 10, $11 that could give you some power or some speed, whatever you're looking for. And you can get them on the cheap because not many other managers are going after those players. So I think Dan Vogelbach's a guy to keep an eye on over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I also like that he is batting, as you mentioned, mostly cleanup for Pittsburgh and not back in the leadoff spot. Is the last time we talked about Dan Vogelbach on the show, that's where he was at for the Pirates, and he was in a different category when he was being recommended there. So I feel more things are right with the world where we had Dan Vogelbach being recommended as a power hitter, get you RBIs rather than a run producer in the speed department. So that's nice to see. Speaking of speed, I just want to make my own segues here. Let's move into our stolen base and runs category. Kevin, you got an interesting name here on the outline, so I'm curious to see why you went in this direction. So who do you got that might steal some bases or score some runs, as I tend to forget that is part of this category for this coming week?
This is another guy right along the same lines as Brad Miller here, about 26% rostered in both main events and online championships. That's interesting to me. The same percentage there in 12 as 15s, as if I'm looking at it correctly. And this is Tyler Wade. And, you know, we talked about Jonathan Villar earlier and being acquired by the Angels, and Tyler Wade hasn't been getting full-time playing time anyway, and this could affect that. But he has 8 stolen bases on the season, and he's the type of player we've talked about before. You can't be counting on him for other counting stats. He's just not going to get enough run. No pun intended. But he is going to get late game possibilities as a pinch runner, and his couple of starts a week that he's been getting. And that's good for a guy like this, as long as we're okay in our runs and RBIs department, because we don't want his 200 batting average in our lineup on a regular basis. So he's a guy for if you need a stolen base or two, kind of along the lines of Brad Miller, multi-position eligible. He's available for us this time of year when there's not a lot out there, and if you're okay everywhere else, then you can afford once in a while to throw him in there for a week.
Chris, Tyler Wade seems like it's somebody that would fit right into your Glarf team based on what you said earlier about being last in league in stolen bases. So I don't know if you have enough of a lead in RBIs or home runs to take that hit, but that might be somebody worth taking a look at this week.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's really difficult in Roto to kick categories down the road, but it is at that point because I am so far behind in stolen bases that what's that extra point that I could possibly get? And also, who am I sitting to put him in for, especially when my team is healthy? And Kevin brought it up. The guys that you're going to be able to find there on the waiver wire that may be able to give you double-digit steals the rest of the season, these guys aren't going to be batting 250 to 300. They're guys that are batting close to 200. You look all across the board in any type of league, those guys that are available that have 7, 8, 9 steals right now, they're batting just below, if not barely above 200. The guys that are going to be successful in terms of winning leagues is you got to be savvy. And if you can go out and get a guy who's going to give you 2-3 steals over a couple of weeks, that might give you a boost. Or you just get lucky and you run into John Birdie and you get him for 20 steals in 1 month, which is just absolutely amazing. I didn't get any of John Birdie. I don't know if you guys did, but boy, what an amazing achievement it's been. And he's boosted up so many teams that were able to scoop him up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's to piggyback onto something you said about getting that extra point in that one category. You also got to know how much stolen bases do you need to get to that 1 point. And if you're already at a point where it's one thing to be last in a category. It's another thing to be last in a category and need 15 steals to get up to the next spot. If you're not going and that person's still trying to get steals as well, sometimes it is worth just like completely tanking the category when you're at this point in the season and doubling down on those other categories if you realize you're going to do more harm than good in your other categories trying to chase this maybe one standings point in stolen bases or whatever that category might be.
Yeah, I haven't looked. I believe I'm anywhere from 6 to 8 behind, which is a lot to make up in stolen bases. It's not RBIs or runs where you could scoop that up and move up a couple places quickly. It's really hard with stolen bases. I have less than 30.
All right, then maybe not in Glarf, but in other leagues, Chris, who are you looking at to maybe get you a couple extra stolen bases or a run producer in general?
There's a couple guys here. One I just want to mention, I don't know how many stolen bases he can really give you. He did have 13 between AAA and the majors last year. He doesn't have any this year, but he just started to get the run and playing time, and that's Jake Meyers out there in Houston. He is 50% rostered. He hasn't been able to get much opportunity. He doesn't have the best sprint speed. It's gone down consistently over the last 5 years, but he still is only 26 years old, and because he is getting the run, there's the opportunity to possibly get some steals there, and it is a good offense where there's going to be runs. Now, a guy who I'm going after in a lot of other leagues where he isn't as rostered and is available, and that's Nicky Lopez in Kansas City. 70% rostered. He has 5 stolen bases, but we saw what he did last year. He had 22 stolen bases. He's not going to strike out a ton, and he has a good walk rate, so he's going to get on base enough, and he seems to be playing 4 times a week right now. So in a couple other leagues where I know Nicky Lopez is available and I'm hurting for stolen bases, I'm going after him.
Yeah, I feel like Nicky Lopez, thanks a lot, Kevin. I have held on to him a lot longer than I probably should have throughout the season. He should be available in more of my leagues, and that's my own fault because he's not available because I've held on to him. So we'll see if I'm able to force myself to put him into there's been plenty of times where I have forced myself to put him into the lineup because the rest of the roster is either so injured, and he does provide at least 2 positions, both middle infield flexibility. So that's in that aspect is really nice. I wish it didn't take him I think a month and a half to steal his first base, but it will be nice to see if they just, as more and more the youth come in Kansas City, they let them pretty much do whatever they want to do, which I know is asking a little much, but it will be still nice to see if that happens. All right, let's move into our overall opportunity category, because this category where players might be seeing good matchups, extra playing time coming up, maybe some added flexibility in the positional eligibility department. Before I do that, let's talk about some schedule notes for some teams coming up this coming week. Usually I talk about teams, the few teams that have a full slate. Almost every team has a full slate next week, which is nuts, which is nice to see. Obviously, as somebody who wants to watch a lot of baseball, there are only 10 teams that have less than 7 games next week, with the vast majority of the league scheduled for a full slate, as I mentioned. So only San Diego, Milwaukee, Philadelphia, Texas, Seattle, Oakland, the Angels, Minnesota, Tampa Bay, and the Yankees have less than 7 games, and they all have 6 games. No team has a 2 off day week ahead of them for this coming week. Cleveland and Detroit do play a doubleheader on Monday. That gives Detroit 8, Cleveland 7, even though Cleveland does have the off day on Thursday. Cincinnati and Pittsburgh have their doubleheader on Thursday. That gives the Reds 8 games and Pittsburgh 7 games, despite the Pirates having an off day on Monday. As Kevin talked about last week, and we talk about every week here, Colorado will be back on the road for all 7 games next week, making it a lot easier to make your decisions here. They travel to LA to face the Dodgers for the first 3, and then a 4-game set in Arizona over the weekend, which ironically is the same 2 opponents they just hosted in Colorado this week that we're finishing up right now. And like I said, there are no teams that have 2 off days next week. So plenty of at-bats, plenty of innings pitched to go around this coming week. With all that in mind, Kevin, who are we looking at to take advantage of their situation this coming week?
Yeah, I want to double down on one of the guys I brought up in this same category last week, and that's because I'd like to hear what Chris has to say about his upcoming playing time, and that's Victor Reyes. And those that may not remember or weren't with us last week, one of the things I was looking at was if you drop the minimum number of plate appearances down, he's 6th in the league in hard contact percentage, and his ground ball percentage is below 50%. So I think there's good things coming. And he did get 4 hits in his next 3 starts after we talked about that, a double, and then a home run today that I didn't have included there. So I am big on Victor Reyes, especially if this is going to lead to more playing time. And that's why I was hoping our Detroit Tigers guest would have some input.
Yeah, it's interesting because I probably watch less Tigers now over the last couple months because they've been just so frustrating. And Victor Reyes has been in this organization for 5 years. He's been up with the big club, but he's never been a consistent starter. He will either start the year in the outfield and center field, and then they give it to the kid that'll come up and take it from him. Or he's someone who starts in the minors and then comes up. He's had a little bit of injury issues in the past, but this is a guy who's a super high BABIP guy. It's unbelievable, 337 for his career, which has been able to help him afford to have a nice batting average. He's batting 289 this year. No steals yet, but he is a guy who does have a little bit of speed. He's a guy who could get double-digit steals if he could get consistent playing time. The concern with me is that he just doesn't walk enough, and that's why they hadn't had him at the top of the order early on in the season when he was getting more run. It's just interesting because I don't know what path he has to consistent playing time over and over. I think he's probably a better option than some of the other guys they do have out there. Willi Castro is playing right field. Willi Castro should not be in the outfield. He's not an outfielder by trade. He's a little better on the infield. Robbie Grossman has not looked very good this season. Victor Reyes is someone who's been consistent. He had that home run today. That's been helpful. I'd like to see him maybe in that 2-hole behind Riley Green if he can start getting consistent at-bats. So I think he's a guy with the 8 games coming up this week. I imagine him playing in at least 6 of them. It's going to be really interesting to see what the Tigers do through this month. I don't know if they're going to completely be able to turn it around. They do have hopefully a couple pieces on this squad that they can maybe flip for some prospects, specifically some hitting prospects or some pitching prospects. They do have some back-end bullpen guys that could be available. But it's going to be hard when you have guys like Robbie Grossman and Jonathan Scope and Jeimer Candelario who just haven't been good enough to get any value in return. But I like Victor Reyes. He's always been a solid player, and I think that's a good call there, Kevin.
All right, Chris, we'll turn it right back to you, though. Who, besides Victor Reyes, maybe, who might you be targeting based on all the games that we are going to see this coming week?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm actually going to go with the Tigers as well. They have 8 games this week. The one guy who, if he is available in your league that I think you absolutely have to go get is Eric Haase. Eric Haase has several home runs over his last week. I believe he has 3. This guy has big power in his bat. He had over 20 last year. He is 90% owned in most NFC leagues. You may not be able to find him in many of your leagues, but the other guy I might be looking at would be Willi Castro, who I brought up. And the reason I'm looking for this is maybe several weeks, if not a month down the road. The guy is still very young. In the 2020 COVID year, he was fantastic. He batted over 300. He was really good. Last year, didn't get much playing time, was sent down. He is just 10% owned. He has hits. He has double-digit hits his hits in 3 straight games, a couple double-digit games. He's batting 262 on the season. Like I said, he's not an outfielder. Like he should be in on the infield. And this is the last year of the contract for Jonathan Scope. Jonathan Scope has just looked lost at the plate. I think maybe his best days are behind him. He's going to be 31 here in a couple months. And the Tigers really just don't have a solution for the middle infield. We talked about Isaac Paredes being traded away in the offseason. Cody Clemens got a quick stint up with the Tigers. He didn't look very good. I think there's the opportunity for Willi Castro to just take over for Scope. Maybe Scope can get flipped. I wouldn't even be surprised if Scope got DFA'd at some point if it continues to be this bad. And maybe Willi Castro ends up your starting second baseman and see what you got the rest of the season with him. 8 games coming up this week. He's played 5 of the last 7 games. So I think he has the opportunity to play 6 games this week.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people you don't think about too much is that DFA option, even for somebody with with a decent contract like Scope or whoever, even if they're not producing and you need to see those players on the field like Castro or anybody else, that's an option. You don't have to trade them. Like they don't have to be traded just to make room. You can just be like, cut it off, cut where it hurts, and make sure that those guys get the playing time so they get in there. I don't feel it happens often enough as it should, but it
does happen now, and it didn't used to. Owners have finally shown that at least on rare occasion they're willing to take that L. Yep, we signed this guy because we were going to flip him at the deadline. He wasn't good enough, but we need to see our guys anyway. There's a couple Royals that I'm hoping may fall into that category if they don't get anything in return for him as well. One of them they already moved.
Right, and they actually traded him, so that was nice.
Yeah.
The problem here in Detroit is the owner and the management. Chris Ilitch is just completely lost. I don't even think he knows who Willi Castro is. He had a press conference. He had a press conference the other day introducing, because he also owns the Detroit Red Wings. He was introducing the new coach for the Red Wings, and he actually got a couple questions about the Tigers, which he's not readily available in press conferences very often. And his response was just baffling, saying that he's seeing good progress from the young kids on the Tigers. Who is he talking about? That doesn't make much sense. And then Al Avila as the general manager, you should listen to Detroit Sports Radio. They want this guy gone. They wanted this guy gone 3 years ago. This is year 7 of a rebuild, and they seem to be taking a step back. So in terms of anybody getting DFA'd on the Tigers, I just don't know if management is smart enough to make a move like this.
Ouch. Okay. All right. Those are harsh words, Chris, but they're your team, so you can make them. That's fine. All right. Let's move into our pitching categories here. We will look further ahead as we'll go back to our future 2-start section that we skipped over last week. We'll get back at it here on the off chance that some of these pitchers stick with their schedule and they get their 2 starts, not this coming week, but the week after. If you want to get ahead, these are the guys you want to look at. So, Chris, I'm going to start with you here. There's a whole list of pitchers that currently look like they are slated to get 2 starts. Again, not this week, but the following week. Of this list, let me know a player or a pitcher that you would be stashing this week in FAAB for their 2-starter. And then give me a name on here that you think people will be in on, if not this week, then next week, because they have 2 starts that you will just be completely avoiding.
I look at this list and I'm to be honest, I'm not blown away by it. I was doing a lot of research on this earlier, and there just wasn't too many guys that I was really into. And a lot of it has to do with matchups. You look at the list that we have in front of us, Roansy Contreras in a future start coming up. He looked really bad the other day. Graham Ashcroft as well. Josh Witkowski is somebody that maybe I would like with the Red Sox, but he's got the Yankees twice coming up over the next month, which is tough. Maybe Brad Keller is the guy because he does get Detroit, but it's sandwiched in between Toronto and Houston. So it's really tough. There's not too many guys out there. It's hard to, when you want to get those counting stats and possibly get some wins or move up in Ks, what are you sacrificing by doing that? You could be sacrificing your whip with a huge blow up or your ERA. And this is why it's so important to look at where you are in the standings. Can I possibly give up a decent amount of runs, but still get those strikeouts that I need right now? So it's tough. Looking at the list on there, it's probably Cal Quantrill, Detroit, Chicago, Detroit. So Cal Quantrill's probably the guy there. He hasn't been that good this season. Alex Cobb's another one. The underlying numbers of Alex Cobb look a lot better than what the overlying numbers basically are. He had an IL stint, which hurt him. So Alex Cobb could be a decent option. Arizona somehow finds a way to put up runs. You look at their roster and just like, how are they getting runs? They've had games in the past earlier this season where they've been able to do it. So as I was probably ranking these, it's probably Quantrill, then probably Cobb in terms of what I like that's on there.
Yeah, that's fair. And as a reminder to everybody listening, the list that I give to these guys are based on pitchers that are 50% rostered or below on Yahoo. So their rostership is going to change based on their format that you're looking at. And a lot of these pitchers' rosterships changed on the daily basis based on streamers and daily moves that we see. Kevin, of course, same question. Is there a name on here that stands out in either direction for you?
Yeah, there's a couple I like. I want to start with Chris Archer because I've been using him in multiple leagues for several weeks, and it's not great. Most of his starts are 4 innings. He's went 5 innings 3 times. 2 of those 3, he's got the win. I kind of look at this kind of like he's using a middle reliever. I'm not counting on getting wins for him, But if he goes that 5th inning, I might, especially when he's got a 2-start week. Then I'm talking about I'm probably guaranteed 8 innings. That's more than I'm getting from a middle reliever. And if he goes 5 in one of them, I got a chance for a win. And he's at home next week with Milwaukee and the Chicago White Sox coming to town. And I don't know if people realize, because there's not a lot of strikeouts there either, how good he's been. He's got a 3.08 ERA on the season. He hasn't given up over 2 runs since May 28th, and he's only done it one other time all year. He's pitching really well. The problem is most of his starts are 4 innings, but those 5-inning starts I talked about, that's 3 of his last 6. So it's getting to where there's more of a chance he can get that 5th inning with the possibility for a win, because he has been in pitching well. And it's not that there's no strikeouts. He's almost 7 strikeouts per 9, just under 7 per 9. He's got 47 in 61 innings. And the other one, in spite of rough outings, his last 2 outings, when the walks finally got to him, because he's been walking too many guys all season, but he had 4 really good starts in a row, is Glenn Otto for Texas. I like that schedule. I like getting Oakland and Seattle both at home in Arlington for him. But he would be my second choice on this list. I think Chris Archer, in spite of the lack of wins and not as many strikeouts as we would like, has been a really good pitcher all season long.
And despite being in line for 2 starts, I don't think anybody's getting Gombered for this 2 starts.
Not at both at home, no.
Not both in Colorado, yeah. As the predictable schedule of the Rockies continues, getting both of those starts at home, something to avoid.
Kevin, I like the Archer thing, and it's actually better if he just goes 4 and possibly 5, because you're not turning over that lineup a 3rd time, because I feel like with him and Otto and a lot of guys on this list, they're guys that the blow up could happen at any moment. And with Archer not being able to strike out a ton of guys, his xFIP and FIP are through the roof compared to his actual ERA. It's almost like you're just you're riding the train of something that could be imploding at any moment. It's moves like this where if you can get a 2-start guy who, hey, he goes 4 or 5 innings in both starts and gives you 8-9 innings combined, only gives up 2 or 3 runs, you're going to be happy with that. And if you can scoop up a win. So sometimes you got to make the risk. Most of the guys on this list are guys with ERAs north of 5, but you need to be able to look at the matchups. I think that's the most important part. And also, like I had talked about, what could you possibly be sacrificing if there is a blow up right there? But it's moves like this that are going to help you win. So I like the Archer a little bit more than Otto, but certainly the matchups for Otto seem encouraging.
All right, let's look at this coming week, guys, instead of looking too far ahead at our counting pitching categories. So that's wins and Ks. Kevin, we'll go right back to you here. Who are you looking in the more near term to add to those counting stats?
I'm looking at Dean Kremer for Baltimore. He gets Texas and the Angels both at home in Baltimore this week, and he's been really good since he returned. He's only been back for 5 starts. He went 4 1/3 right off the bat and got roughed up for 3 earned runs with a home run in 4 1/3. Since then, he's won at least 5 innings in all 4 of his starts, going back just the past 3 weeks. Hasn't given up more than 1 earned run in any of them, and that was only in 1 start. The last 3 starts, he's given up 0 runs in 18 2/3 innings. So he's averaging over 6 innings an outing for the last 3. He's given up no runs. The strikeout rate isn't quite what we would like to see. 14 strikeouts in those 18 innings, but there are some strikeouts there and a couple of pretty nice matchups in his home ballpark this week. Dean Kremer is the latest of, it seems like we've been talking about a lot of Orioles pitching recently, and it's usually the guys going on Monday or Tuesday because they're going to get 2 starts for the week, and we'll see how it goes with Kremer this week.
You got to hope, of course, at least in Kremer's situation, that fence change in Baltimore can balance out the heat wave that they are currently sitting in and will continue to sit in for the foreseeable future this summer. Kremer, 75% rostered across main event leagues. So still available out there in those deeper leagues, but readily available in those 12 teamers, 10% across online championships. So take a look on your waiver for that option. Chris, are you looking at any starters or any pitcher that you think could walk their way into some wins and Ks this week?
I mean, before I get to my guy, I'll echo Kevin. Dean Kremer is the guy on this list that I would like to have. He's been absolutely fantastic. Now, I'd like to know, can that 88% left on base percentage continue? Probably not, but I also expect him to have more strikeouts than what he's been giving you so far. He's someone in the minors, was always a higher strikeout guy, and he sports a really good fastball with some good off-speed stuff. So I think Dean Kremer is the guy that you got to look at. Another one that could be, a speculative look would maybe be Paulo Espino. He has Philly and Atlanta, not the best matchups, in my opinion. But this guy does have some talent. His last outing, he gave up 4 runs to the Pirates. But before that, he was looking really good. A lot of it were one-start innings where he was coming in at the end of games. But he went 3 2/3 against Miami a couple weeks ago. 2 strikeouts, didn't have any walks. He did give up 4 hits and a run, but then he put together 2 decent starts in a row here against Philly, who he's going to be going against next week. And then also the Rangers, where he pitched into the 6th inning in one, completed 5 in the other. And he had 5 strikeouts and 3 strikeouts. He has good stuff. He's been able to stay away from the walks in the most part. He's got 1 game where he did walk 4, and it was against Philly. But he's probably number 2 on that list. But Dean Kremer's been really fantastic. This is a guy who you could be talking about at the end of the year if he continues to do this as one of those really fantasy surprises and studs. It's not often at the start of the season you're going to say, hey, I rostered a Baltimore Oriole on my team, and he was a really solid fantasy pitcher. You don't get much of that. He's been really a surprise out there at Baltimore.
Yeah, so we're doubling down on Dean Kremer, apparently. So you guys all hear that. Let's move in away from our counting categories and into our ratios. Of course, we're talking about ERA and WHIP in your standard leagues. Kevin, let's start us off here. Who is chipping away at these ratios as we head into July?
Yeah, I'm looking at Diego Castillo up in Seattle. He had that hiccup end of April into early May, gave up multiple runs in 4 out of 6 appearances, blew up his ratios a little bit, and that can be used to our advantage. He's still sitting at a 4.82 ERA. Nobody's looking at him. But since May 23rd, he's given up 2 earned runs and has a 1.21 ERA over that time. 4 of his 5 wins and a couple of saves. Unfortunately, he only has 1 multi-inning appearance. He did have 2 innings clear back early in June up in Baltimore and had 2 clean innings with 3 strikeouts. But typically, it's 1 inning. He's a setup guy now, but he has put in the position to vulture some wins, and he will be used to get a save once in a while. Those are added bonuses for a guy that's going to get at least 2, if not 3 appearances in a week and put up those low ratios that we're looking for here.
All right, as you mentioned, Castillo being more of a setup role, he's got a save or 2 under his belt, but not going to be that option. We'll get to the saves category in a little bit. Before we do that, Chris, are you looking at any pitchers out there that are going to chip away at your ratios? Maybe they're not you might look into a save or 2, but that's not what we're focusing on here. It's just those ERA and the WHIP ratios. Who you got?
Yeah, this is something over the last few years where we don't see starters going as long as they used to, that some of these middle relief guys have been really solid. And there's a few guys that I really like. Michael Fulmer, who has now gotten up to 90% owned, amazingly. He's been absolutely electric for Detroit this year. And it's one of the reasons the Detroit's bullpen is in the top 10 of bullpen in the league. And they've been able to actually keep runs down for a lot of other teams. So he sports an amazing curveball. He's blocked there by Gregory Soto. I don't know if one of these 2 possibly get moved, if not both of them. I'm not sure how much of the future both of these guys could be there. And they could actually get some return for Fulmer or Soto. So Michael Fulmer is a guy that I like. I also like Eli Morgan out in Cleveland. He did have a little stumble last week, but before that, he was absolutely lights out. And he's someone who's been able to pitch anywhere from 1 inning, and he's gone 2 and 3 a couple times. So he's got really good stuff out there in Cleveland. And he's only 30% rostered in most leagues. And then the further guy out, I'm sorry, I'm giving you guys 3 guys here just because I like all of them so much, is Collin McHugh. He's only 10% rostered, but this is a Braves bullpen. Obviously, we know Kenley is on the IL right now, and they have Minter over there and Will Smith. But Collin McHugh is a guy who can really help your ratios. He went 3 innings the other day. He can scoop up some wins here and there. Rough start of the season, but he's someone in a lot of my saves holds leagues. All 3 of these guys are guys that I like that can do really good by keeping your ratios in good manner with WHIP and also ERA.
For those who listen on a regular basis, know that we will not stop anybody from talking about Collin McHugh on this episode, on the show. So the number of pitchers you want to talk about here is perfectly fine, specifically since you ended with McHugh. So well done on that part. All right. None of these guys you talked about, or either of you guys talk about, are really in line for saves, at least this coming week. Fulmer could back himself into the position, as you mentioned, Chris, if they move away from Soto. I think we've talked about that on the show a couple times. It almost seems like a matter of time, but for whatever reason, Soto stays in that role for Detroit right now. So who are we looking at that could back into some saves? Chris, I'm going to start with you on this one. Who's your save stash and or speculative ad in the category this week, since you need the category, at least in Glarf?
Yeah, for me, I think it's Anthony Bass out there in Miami. He's someone who was going to possibly have those opportunities last year, but he didn't. He ended up pitching in 70 games last year, ended with a 3.82 ERA. But the problem that he had last year were the walks. He's a little bit under 9 K per 9, but his walks were at 3.5 last year. He's been really solid the last couple of weeks. He's only given up 1 run in his last 13 outings, and he's been the setup guy over there for Tanner Scott. And 1.69 ERA. He's getting a lot of soft contact, and he's only given a 2.6% home run to fly ball rate, which is absolutely excellent. And he's been able to get out of a lot of jams. So he's someone who's been really solid. I think there's a speculative look to possibly be, can he end up being the closer? I know he's 5 years older than Tanner Scott, but Tanner Scott is an issue with keeping guys off the base and also walking way too many guys. So that's been the issue with Tanner Scott. So Anthony Bass is a guy who I think is just as talented, has a little bit more pedigree because he's been around a little longer. When you look at Tanner Scott, sure, Tanner Scott has some electric stuff and 14.5 K per 9, which is incredible, but the 5 walks per 9 can be very troublesome. So it'll be interesting to see how it shakes out moving forward. Obviously, it's Scott's job right now, but Anthony Bass is someone who could possibly, scoop up a save here or there if Scott goes a couple days in a row, or if they move on from Scott or he just stumbles and they end up demoting him. I think Anthony Bass would have the opportunity.
All right, Kevin, are you going to cop out this week as well? Skip the category, or is there somebody else?
I didn't know that was an option.
I know. No, it's not for you, Chris.
So we're getting the time of year where not only are we looking at speculative closers moving into a role, we're looking at a lot of our teams are going to lose closers as some of these guys start to move. We have 2 full weeks leading into the All-Star break, and then only the weekend, the half week following the All-Star game, and 1 more full week until the deadline, which I think is on a Wednesday this week, August 2nd or 3rd, Tuesday or Wednesday, the way they moved it around a little bit with the season, and with the All-Star break being a week later than it typically is. So it's going to sneak up on us really quick, some of the guys that are moved and other guys moved in. And as a Royals fan, I fully expect that Scott Barlow is going to be moved. He's one of the guys I hope they don't move, but he's probably he is probably their most valuable trade asset that they have. He's been one of the top 5 relievers in baseball over the past 3 seasons in many different metrics. I see him moving. Stalmont has had injury issues throughout the season, banged up here and there. And we talked about a guy earlier in the offseason that could move into the role in Kansas City if these guys moved, and that's Dylan Coleman. And his issue all season, speaking of high walk rate, Chris, it's almost 7 walks per 9 for the season. But over his last 7 outings, 4 of them have been 0 walks and no more than 1 in an outing, 3 total over those 7 appearances. A lot of Royals fans, including myself, are up in arms why we did not see him today. If they were going to use Scott Barlow today, why did they leave Pampas in for a 6-out save try and let Green walk it off when Coleman hasn't pitched in 4 days. But the Royals aren't going anywhere this season. We can't get too worked up over things like that. But he's a guy that if you are speculating on saves and if you are worried you're going to lose some, especially if you're rostering Scott Barlow, he may be the guy to take over here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. We talk about stash throughout the most of the first half of the season as we talk about who could move into the role. We're at that point, like Kevin said, you got to see who could bump into the role naturally because somebody else not only is losing the job, but they're not even going to be on the roster any longer. Good eye there, and I'm sure that'll be a consistent recommendation throughout the next couple shows from at least Kevin, if not our savvy guests moving forward as well. So keep an eye on those roster changes or possible roster changes. Something I want to just touch on real quick that I didn't touch on earlier in the schedule, especially with all the hoopla and the Boston sports radio. It's good to know that Toronto is going to be on the road all next week. So nobody is going to lose any playing time based on vaccine requirements going into Canada. Something to rest easy on. You don't have to lose your Tanner Houcks of the world and Jarren Duran's, even though you probably spent over $100 bidding on him last week just to miss out on the first half of the week with him. I digress.
That's a great point, Adam. And I've looked into this. The Royals have a 4-game series in Toronto next weekend. That's a big deal for our fantasy rosters. And we have no way of knowing. Somebody point blank asked one of the Royals beat writers on Twitter within the last day or so. And he said, I have no idea. They're not going to tell us until they announce that they're on the restricted list. They're not going to do that. Especially
don't they
when
know that we have fantasy teams?
Right,
I know, right?
Exactly.
These things.
Especially when it's the second half of the week in NFBC style formats, and even in week long, you're losing half your week. It's really tough for these teams that aren't in the AL East, so we haven't already seen them make that trip, and we know who wasn't available last time. But keep your eyes and ears open. Hopefully somebody will break something on Monday so we have an idea what's going on.
Yeah, like you said, AL East, we all know what's happening there, or at least if you're paying any attention, you knew that Tanner Houck wasn't going to be there. Jarren Duran has come out and said recently that he will make the trip to Canada by the time the Red Sox go back to Toronto, either in August or September. And so he could not comment on Tanner Houck's situation. We'll just leave that there for now. So you'll have to keep an ear out for that if you do roster Houck in any of your leagues. But yeah, for Kansas City and any other team that hasn't made the trip to Canada yet, find out on Monday type of situation. All right, let's end it here with our final category. My favorite category to hear, because it's always interesting to see what players get thrown out here. Kevin, I'm going to start with you because you did put your name on the outline, and I love where you're going with this, though I don't have any of your notes, so I'm curious to know where you're going with it. I know where I would go with it, so let's hear who you'd be stashing in this wild card section.
This is a shout out to the great Twitter handle we had for the past 7 or 8 weeks. That was Vinnie Pasquianto did not get called up today. And it was updated every single day for the past nearly 2 months. And that Twitter handle has decided that they will continue with a new next best player that they think is available. And right now, it is Miguel Vargas did not get called up today. And in spite of what has happened over the past 3 or 4 days, where now we've seen Justin Turner hit 3 home runs, this was something that was looking almost imminent for the Dodgers with the way Justin Turner has been producing, or not producing, I should say, and Miguel Vargas with a 12% walk rate, 16% strikeout rate, hitting .294 with 12 home runs, 56 RBI, and 65 runs scored. Oh, and 8 stolen bases for the 6'3" third baseman in just 341 plate appearances at AAA. And this isn't the first time he's done this, right? He's their top prospect. He's did the same thing at AA last year. He now has over 700 plate appearances, AA and AAA. The magic number for a lot of teams is 500 or 600 plate appearances combined at the 2 top levels. He appears ready. and it appears the Dodgers may have a need if Justin Turner doesn't continue what appears that might be the beginning of turning his season around. And this is the type of guy that going down the stretch and into the postseason, which the Dodgers fully expect to be a part of on into November, this is the kind of guy that you want to see if he's going to be able to make the adjustment to that next level now, not wait till the end of September. He's a guy that in leagues where you are able to and you have the spot and room for your one stash, Miguel Vargas is somebody I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, those 8 stolen bases are nice. I don't put as much stock into him this year into AAA level with all the pitch clocks that are scattered around the AAA level as they are inflating those stolen base numbers. But as you mentioned, he's coming close to double-digit stolen bases at each level or at each stop that he's made in each season. Might have some rise speed on the base pass when he makes it to the majors. Probably not double-digit steals in a season, but somewhere close. I hope we don't see the same thing with Vargas as we did with Gavin Lux, where everybody was saying the same thing as Gavin Lux was coming up right around this time of year too, before he's made his debuts. Hey, you're gonna want him up, getting ready for the playoff run. You're gonna want him, and they dragged their feet, and they finally called him, and he wasn't getting any playing time. I am a little afraid of the Dodgeritis setting in on Vargas and every other positional player. They do find ways to play their best players. I will give them that. But their rookies, I am worried about the amount of playing time Vargas might see, even if he does get the call up in LA. Is that less of a concern for you with Vargas based on what he's been doing in AAA, do you think? Or do you think that same concern should still be there?
It's definitely a concern. And it was less of a concern prior to today. The 1-2 home run game by Justin Turner wasn't really concerning to me. It happens. And he's done that multiple times throughout his career, and it doesn't mean we're going to see a big turnaround. But then adding that other home run on Saturday, it's like, Justin Turner might be ready for a hot streak, and that might prolong this a little longer than I was hoping.
All right, Chris, we'll move on to you here. Your last recommendation here in our wildcard section. Of course, this is typically players that you're going to be stashing. Maybe they're currently on the IL and you're stashing them when they return. Prospects that are eligible to be picked up. Just a flyer. Who do you got?
I like how you call it a wild card or a flyer, because it is a flyer. I can't believe I'm going to talk about this guy, because I feel like since 2013, I've gone back and forth on whether I'm in on this guy, out on this guy. A lot of people liked him last year when he was in Atlanta, and he's with the Cubs now. He's going to be coming off the IL here in a couple weeks. He's going to have a start on Monday in AAA. It's Drew Smyly of the Cubs. So Drew Smyly was actually pitching okay through 42 2/3 innings before he ended up on the IL, 3.80 ERA. The walks were down, which is really encouraging. The Ks aren't to where what we saw in the shortened 2020 season, or even where it was back when he was with the Reyes not too long ago. But he's starting to change the type of pitcher he is. He's not going to get you with his fastball. Obviously, his bread and butter for years has been his curveball and even his cutter. Before he got injured this year, he was throwing between his curveball and his cutter. He was throwing that nearly 70% of the time. So the fastball is not a part of his game anymore, but he's going to be 33 years old here soon. If he's going to have some longevity within this league, he needs to change what type of pitcher he is. And if he can do it with the off-speed stuff, a la a Jamie Moyer who pitched till he was 782 years old back in the day, Drew Smyly is the type of pitcher that could actually probably do this. He's got good stuff. He can fool you. He's got to be able to stay away from the home runs. And the seasons where he's been a mess is the seasons where he's given up a lot of home runs, and that home run fly ball rate has been close to 19-20% when he's been wrong. But this is a guy who's given you 175 innings in the past, 126 innings last year. That was a mixed bag. Strikeout rate was not as high as it was before. He ended up with a 4.48 ERA. But I'd be interested to see if he can come back here within the next week and a half. And if he can throw out 2 nice starts for the Cubs, is that a trade piece for them, or is it someone that they can just roster moving forward? So he's a guy I'm stashing just to see what he can possibly give you, because he's someone who's going to be a boom or bust guy. If he's available in your league, I think you can get him on the cheap to roster him the rest of the season. If you have to let him go, hopefully you didn't pay too much for him, but it's going to be guys like this that can take you over the hump. And if you can find a veteran pitcher, because that's what he is, if you can find a veteran pitcher first, second week of July to get you past these next 2 months, because really you only need 50, 60 innings out of him, then Drew Smyly could be your guy.
Nice. We don't get enough wild card like IL stashes. I always mention that that's a player that fits the mold here, but we don't get enough for those recommendations. So I like those. Obviously, if you have that flexibility, as most of us do not in most of our leagues, because of all the other injuries that we are currently holding on to, this is still a viable option to stash. Stashes come in many shapes and forms, and Drew Smyly is currently one of them. Keep an eye on his availability, and if you have that spot there. Kevin, why don't you take us out with any other, as we head closer and closer to the All-Star break, any additional recommendations on strategy or just overall concepts that you have for everybody?
Yeah, this is something we talked about multiple times last season, a couple of times this season already. This may be the biggest weekend of the season as far as this is concerned. Don't forget to get your FAAB ins in on Sunday evening and take advantage of the fact that many people will. Not only is it a holiday weekend, but with the actual holiday falling on Monday, celebrations already beginning, will continue all through Sunday and into Monday. There's going to be a lot of opportunities here. Drop our bids a little bit. And this is a huge time because, like I said, 2 weeks before the All-Star break, a lot of people take a break themselves for that week. So we got a couple of weeks coming up. The next week they'll be like, oh, one more week before the All-Star break. And then the weekend of the All-Star break, we don't set our lineups till Friday. And so this is a huge couple of weeks to make a move. And when you were talking about the schedules this week for a lot of these teams, they continue into next week, especially with a couple of divisions. You look at the AL Central, well, the White Sox has 7 games this week, 8 next week. Cleveland has 7 games this week because of a doubleheader, but they do get an off day. They have 8 games next week. Detroit is the one that has both 8 games this week and next week. The Royals, 7 this week, 8 next week. And then the NL East, similar, 7-game weeks. There are 3 off days for 5 teams over the next 2 weeks, and the Phillies have 2 of them. So many opportunities to get guys that other people aren't even going to be after because they're not even putting bids into our lineups, and play 15 or 16 games over the next 2 weeks and really try to make moves in especially the runs and RBIs categories.
All right. I know this won't be an issue in all of our Earth leagues in Glarf and Tarf, as we'll all be playing many bids, but it's nice to know that some players in some of my leagues will be taking the weekend off, maybe because of the holiday. Hopefully they're not.
Some of them might not be
advice.
Intending to yet, but there's a lot of partying to go on before tomorrow.
Or if you live in my neighborhood, that's been happening for weeks since Memorial Day. That's nothing strange. All right, Chris, I want to thank you once again, man, for joining us this week. Of course, Chris Deary can be found on the Palazzo podcast. Why don't you let everybody else know anywhere else that you are putting out content, where they should be looking out for things, and where they can find you on Twitter?
Yeah, Palazzo Podcast, 2 L's, 2 Z's, every Friday afternoon seems to be our schedule moving forward. My co-host and I, Michael Govier, who's a fantastic guy who absolutely grinds in this industry. So check us out. You can also catch me, CDeary1999 on Twitter. And I want to go back to what Kevin said. Are you telling me I have to watch the Tigers 16 times in the next 14 days?
You got to get that MLB.TV subscription. You got to get.
Oh, I got it. Don't worry.
You got to get your money's worth. Yeah. So you got to make sure that you're watching it.
Again, thanks for having me, guys. It was an absolute blast. It was great to carve out a Saturday night to do a podcast, something that I haven't done on the weekends in quite a while. And your guys' show is so informative and fun, and it really sets up a lot of people for those weekend FAAB bids. So it was an absolute pleasure being on the show, and I'd love to come back as well.
We got it, Kevin. We got the additional praise from our guest, and it's part of our quota every week. No, Chris, thank you so much, man. But it's because of guests like you that we are able to give out such good information to everybody. So thank you so much for joining us. That is going to wrap it up for episode 66 of On the Wire. Please make sure to subscribe, share, and review the podcast wherever you're listening. We will be back every Sunday throughout the season with detailed FAAB breakdown through the 2022 season. Of course, keep a lookout for Kevin's companion article over at pitcherlist.com. It comes out every Sunday afternoon as well. You can follow myself on the Twitter at 80grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin is at Hasting Kevin. Of course, follow the pod itself at On the Wire Pod. Once again, I'd like to thank Chris Deary for joining us. Follow him on the Twitter at CDeary1999. I am Adam Howe, and on behalf of Kevin Hasting, thanks for listening. And with that, we bid you goodbye.